Well, hello and welcome to this special G20 segment. As the world turns its attention to Johannesburg in just a few weeks for the G20 Leaders Summit, South Africa is placing science, technology and innovation firmly on the global agenda. At the heart of South Africa's G20 presidency is the call for solidarity, equality and sustainability. But what does this mean in practical terms? For the Department of Science, Technology and Innovation, it means pushing for a future where research breakthroughs, innovation and new technologies are not the preserve of a new wealthy nation, but a shared resource for all that lifts all, from open innovation that can drive local development to protecting biodiversity to ensuring women and young people have a seat at the science table. South Africa is making sure that the voices of the global south are heard. And today we ask, how can science serve not only labs and lecture halls, but also communities, businesses and ordinary citizens? Let's start right here. The Science 20 or S20 is the G20 Science and Technology Engagement Group and promotes a dialogue between the scientific community and policymakers. Earlier this year, the Academy of Science of South Africa held a discussion in Pretoria under the theme Climate Change and Well-Being. Well, the theme was meant to address the critical intersection of climate, food, water, energy and land systems. According to the president of the Academy of Science of South Africa, Professor Majosi, said that as scientists, they support the global need for sustainable science-driven solutions to climate challenges. Let's watch.
South Africa's G20 presidency is centered around three foundational themes that also guide our scientific deliberations here. One is solidarity, the other one is equality, and ultimately sustainable development. Solidarity in scientific endeavors means sharing knowledge, data, and technological innovations without unnecessary barriers. It means recognizing that the climate crisis requires collective action informed by the best available science from all corners of the globe. Equality demands that we acknowledge the disproportionate impact of climate change on vulnerable populations and developing nations. It requires us to consider issues of climate justice and ensure that solutions don't exacerbate existing inequalities, but rather serve as vehicles for greater equity. Sustainable development, on the other hand, reminds us that our solutions must balance environmental protection with human advancement. We must find pathways that allow for economic progress while preserving our planet's life-supporting systems for future generations.
Well, after the break, we'll be speaking to South Africa's Minister of Science, Technology and Innovation, Dr. Blade Nzimande, just to help us unpack this a little further. Well, welcome back. Let's now welcome South Africa's Minister of Science, Technology and Innovation, Dr. Blade Nzimande, just to help us unpack this further. Minister, a very good afternoon to you. Thank you so much for your time and your patience. Of course, it's an exciting time for South Africa, but also for science. I mean, science does not exist in a vacuum, as we know. What challenges does the current geopolitical environment present, though, to South Africa's science and innovation priorities, particularly in light of the recent withdrawal of the US funding from, those joint science projects? Is this why, in a way, essentially your department established this working group on science, technology and innovation funding?
Good morning, Gunati, as well as to your viewers and listeners. Thanks for this opportunity. Well, of course, you are right. This is a historic time for us as South Africa. First time G20 is being hosted in the African continent. Yeah. I am convening the Research and Innovation Working Group of the G20. And I must start by saying that this weekend, My counterparts will be arriving for the main meeting of the ministers of research and science in the G20. So it's going to be a very busy week for us. But of course, as you say, we are in a global environment that is having its own very serious challenges. The first one is climate change, which is confronting everyone. And arising out of that is the whole then importance of energy security. Energy security in the light of the fact that we've all committed to reducing carbon emissions, which means moving away from fossil fuel-based generation of electricity to renewables. And that poses a huge challenge for all countries in terms of what needs to be done. We are also, of course, in a period where there are just some intractable armed conflicts in different parts of the world, which is really a problem in our own continent, with millions of people facing starvation in the Sudan. You have a genocide in Gaza. You have got the seemingly intractable conflict in Ukraine, other parts of the Middle East. And all that poses very serious challenges for humanity. And of course, science has got to play its role within this context. So it's against that background that we're actually holding our G20 meeting.
Yeah. So, Minister, just in light of those challenges, as the host of the Research and Innovation Working Group 2, how will South Africa ensure that outcomes here in Pretoria influence what is eventually tabled at the G20 Leaders Summit in November? Essentially, a lot of South Africans also want to know practically what does this mean, not only for South Africa, but also from a global South perspective too?
Yes, there are a number of issues that we've placed on the table, which generally have been accepted by our G20 partners. One immediate one, for instance, is that of placing gender at the center of science, technology, and innovation, particularly the advancement of women. I'm very pleased, by the way, to say that this coming Saturday, we are having a very big, what we call side event on gender, and we've invited just over 100 girls from all over the country, from selected schools. Obviously, we can't invite everybody, but they will be participating and listening into what is going on, in a way motivating them further to actually have an interest in science. We are also focusing on key priority areas that the G20 needs to grapple with. Some of the areas, of course, include a very important matter, Onati, which I hope at some stage we can have enough time to talk about it more. The issue of genetic studies in the African continent, the human genes and variety. You know that human genes, there are different kinds of genes in different parts of the world. In Europe, for instance, they've studied the genetic makeup of European at more than 60%. In the continent is hardly 1%. Now, the importance of having that is so that we could actually devise correct medicines to treat different kinds of diseases and the whole issue of pandemic threats that are still facing us. If you don't understand the gene composition of people in the African continent, it means we can't even develop the right medication to deal with different diseases that they actually face. We do not even have the capacity to even try and prevent and do away with those diseases because we have no genetic detailed material that we can actually work with. This is what we hope with the legacy of South Africa's hosting of the G20. The other area that we are focusing on, we are going to be developing what we call an open innovation demonstrator project. What does that mean? We would like to see the world sharing more scientific results of the studies they do all over the world, so that even countries that do not have enough resources to carry out that research, they can be able to make use of those results, especially for innovation.
Yeah.
And we are positioning our Center for Scientific and Industrial Research, the CSIR, to be the host of this. This is linked to what we are also pushing through this G20, which is an open innovation platform where all innovations, of course, will be shared, even those that have been patented in particular countries, but are shared so that people can be able to understand what kinds of innovations the world has and so on, as part of spreading and equalizing opportunities and access to science and innovation by everybody in the world. So those are very specific deliverables that we are hoping to get out of the G20, so that there is a legacy out of it, that South Africa would have made a contribution. Of course, the United States is not participating, unfortunately, in our working group. Even if they will be participating, they will send very low-level people. We have a challenge with Argentina, which seems to be opposing everything that we are saying. But fortunately, we hope we'll be able to produce a declaration, to answer your other question, from our research and innovation working group that will go to become part of the Leaders' Summit, to actually be adopted then by the leaders in November, that these things will become part of all the other agreements that will be made, and hopefully that a declaration also will be adopted, because a declaration is a bit more stronger to be able to say the G20 countries have committed to put priorities and say these are the things that actually needs to be done. In short, it's climate change, it's energy, it's health innovation, which is very important, because scientists are telling us, by the way, that COVID-19 is not going to be the last pandemic. In fact, within the next 7 to 8 years, we may have another pandemic, a big one. That is why the world now is placing a lot of it. Our president, in fact, is champion for the African continent to look at how we deal and prepare better for future pandemics, and not be caught like with COVID-19, that we were last in the queue. We didn't have vaccines. We had to wait for developed countries to share with us the vaccines. Others were not very keen to do that. So we want to use the G20 to ensure that at least we emerge as the world in a much better position.
Minister, I think you've answered a number of questions that I also wanted to ask you on that, but you've just raised a very important point now around the participation of the United States of America. I don't want it to dilute some of the good things that you've just said, but in light of that, in light of the Troika too, how concerned are you that pertinent conversations that are being had do not involve the United States?
Well, we would have liked the United States to be involved. The door is even open now for them to actually come in. They produce a lot of science globally, in the US itself, as well as relations that they actually have. So it is unfortunate that they are not here, but we can't allow that to hold us back. Because the rest of the world seem very determined to go ahead and to make this first G20 held on the African continent to really be a success and leave a legacy of programs that are actually going to make a difference to humanity. Because, Unathi, what is the aim of science, simply? What is science? Science is actually providing solutions to problems facing humanity. That's what science is about, if you want to define it simply. So we will continue. We are committed that we use the G20 Research and Innovation Working Group as a platform to be able to identify processes towards solutions to the myriad of problems that are actually facing humanity and make the world a better place, which is also another key challenge for science.
Minister, as we wrap our conversation, of course, notwithstanding the definition of science that you've just given us, science can also feel like a distant concept for many citizens. How do you see science and innovation, particularly, especially when you look at the advancements directly improving lives. I mean, a lot of South Africans talking about issues like food security, for instance, and if we have to isolate certain provinces, that this is a challenge too. Health also becoming a concern. Energy you've mentioned too. And of course, you've also mentioned climate resilience.
Well, now we are raising an important matter that we are seized with now. For instance, my department is doing a lot of good work, but it's hardly known, which is why we want to have a much stronger partnerships with media so that ordinary South Africans can understand better what is it that we are actually doing. So that is why now we have our mantra as a department which says we want to place science, technology, and innovation at the center of government, industry, society, so that, and education, so that science is actually known everywhere. We are, for instance, doing very good work. We've now produced some vaccines locally here in South Africa for the first time, which will actually be looking at coronavirus types diseases, as well as other African diseases related to malaria, for instance, and so on. Those are things that we've now been able to do as South Africa through our science system. So we need to make our population to understand those things better. As you rightly say, health innovation is a very, very big thing, because without healthy nations and healthy society, we can't actually be able to develop our countries. We are also looking at biotechnology solutions in order also to ensure our own national sovereignty as a country. We must work with other countries, but on things that we desperately need. We can't just be dependent on other countries. We need to build our own internal capacity, which is one of the tasks assigned by the president to our department, to use science to develop local solutions, to actually deal with local problems, as well as regional problems that we are facing as a continent.
Yeah, and you touched on biotechnology, Minister. I wanted to end our conversation there, but it's a very interesting point you make. If you look at from an African and Global South perspective, South Africa is often described as having the most advanced public science systems on the continent. But how do you then, protect, for instance, and address risks like intellectual property leakage, climate pressures, or even preparedness for these fast-moving technologies such as AI, robotics, and even biotechnology too?
Yes. It's a very important matter that we are really preoccupied with. How do we protect our intellectual property? You'll remember not so long ago, someone was trying to patent Bafana as a US patent intellectual property. Even rooibos tea, some people tried to do that. We had to fight that. We have to continue to fighting that at a number of levels. We do have a dedicated entity, by the way, South Africa, we are lucky, called the National Intellectual Property Management Organization. We are looking at strengthening our legislation now so that we close the loops and the leakages so that things that we discover here in South Africa, we are able to own them, have them registered in South Africa, and also in the rest of the world. We are also sharing this knowledge with the African continent. The one thing that's exciting, by the way, is that the African continent has renewed their program, Science, Technology and Innovation for Africa, which is what we call STISA 2034, which is working together to try and strengthen science in the African continent. We use the strength, as you say, rightly so. We've got the single largest public science system on the African continent to share with the continent, because we can't operate as an island. Because if we are able to tackle African diseases, we can't just say we're going to tackle them only in South Africa when the rest of the continent is exposed. We are not going to be protected at the end of the day. So we were very much central in the joint designing of the Science, Technology and Innovation Strategy for Africa, STISA as we call it, as South Africa. We're also doing quite a number of other things in the continent. For instance, we've got what we call research chairs, which are professorial research chairs to research particular important issues in the continent. One of the latest we have established is on regional migration, for instance, and regional economic development in SADC, to actually say, what are the real underlying patterns for the kind of migration systems that we have? And what is the source of the problem? The nub of the problem is that the region is developed in an uneven fashion. That is why the migration is only towards South Africa, because it has historically been a better developed continent of the Southern African region. So we are looking, for instance, into that. But we also have what we call Oliver Tambo research chairs in Tanzania, in Uganda, and in a number of other sub-Saharan countries, for those countries to prioritize their own research areas that they would like to strengthen. And then we pay as South Africa for these research chairs, because we understand we are very much part of the African continent. If we don't improve our continent, we are not going to be able to achieve the things that we want to achieve as a country. It does not mean that we do not do things our own that are important for South Africa.
Yeah. And when you talk about things that are our own, I mean, one immediately thinks about South Africa being known for also indigenous knowledge. And then when you look at the priorities of South Africa's G20 in terms of its theme, solidarity, equality and sustainability, how do you think that all interlocks?
Well, indigenous knowledge is very much part of the G20 conversations. It's been placed, for instance, by Brazil, which hosted the G20 before us. We are also putting a lot of emphasis on building into those. You'll be pleased, Unathi, to know that one of the immediate things we are working on now is to establish a dedicated institute on indigenous knowledge systems, so that we mainstream this issue of indigenous knowledge. You know, I had a visit recently to China. I discovered that in China, there are 9 hospitals in that country that are primarily using traditional Chinese medicine. And there are a couple of universities that are focusing and specializing on this. We have now established relations with them so that we are able also to learn from them in terms of how do we exploit the strengths that we have. We work with traditional healers, by the way. Yeah. My father, I've told people, was a traditional healer. When he passed away, I thought I will have nothing to do with traditional healers in future. I find myself, I'm at the center of working with these traditional healers, because the medicines and the plants that they use, we are interested in studying them, because you may find that a lot of them actually have got properties that can be able to treat lots of diseases. Why are they using them? It's because there is something that is actually important. So we work very closely with the traditional healers of our country as part of promoting our indigenous knowledge system. But our indigenous knowledge system are not only on health. Historically, we use our ancestors used to look at the stars and be able to predict when is planting time. For what kinds of things that we need to be planting. You were talking about agriculture at some stage. It's a very important matter for us that we also use our own indigenous knowledge system that contributes to actually having better agriculture. We are a water-scarce country as well, by the way, which is another matter that is very important to us. We need to promote innovation of using less water but producing more food, precisely for food sovereignty. But also remember, we are also concerned not about united food sovereignty, but also nutritional food that we actually need to secure for our people.
Absolutely. Minister Nzimande, it's been a pleasure speaking to you. Thank you so much for your time. Really do appreciate it. That was Minister Dr. Blade Nzimande. Well, we've come to the end of our segment. It's clear that at the heart of it, science is about shaping a future where innovation works for people, for the farmer in Limpopo, for instance, the student in Soweto, and the health worker in Lagos, as much as it does for Silicon Valley or even Geneva. As South Africa prepares to host the G20 summit, the conversations happening here in the country are not side notes. They are center stage in determining how the world tackles climate change, health crisis, and economic inequalities. Thanks for watching. Until next time.